From Robin Hood, New York City's largest poverty-fighting philanthropy, I'm Kevin Thompson. Welcome to This Robin Hood Moment. In Albany, a group of policymakers have been meeting to address one of the most critical issues facing New York State today: child poverty. At the center of this effort is the New York State Child Poverty Reduction Advisory Council, or CPRAC for short. This council was born out of the Child Poverty Reduction Act, signed into law by Governor Kathy Hochul in December of 2021. It's a bold, ambitious piece of legislation that sets forth an equally bold goal: to reduce child poverty in New York State by 50% by the year 2031. Consider for a moment the weight of that commitment. We're not just talking about incremental change. We're talking about transforming the futures of thousands of children and families in a profound and measurable way. The numbers are staggering. Currently, nearly 1 in 4 children in New York lives below the poverty line. These children face daily struggles: food insecurity, unstable housing, inadequate health care, challenges that have far-reaching consequences on their development, their education, and ultimately their futures. The work of CPRAC, therefore, is not just about addressing poverty in the abstract, it's about changing the trajectory of young lives. CPRAC has been tasked with studying the deep-rooted causes of child poverty and formulating policy recommendations to tackle them head-on. But this process is far from complete. As we speak, the Council is nearing a critical milestone. This December, the Council will vote on its final report, recommendations that could redefine how New York State addresses child poverty for years to come. So as the December vote approaches, the stakes are higher than ever. What's decided in the coming months will determine how or if New York can deliver on its promise to cut child poverty in half. But before we dive in, if you want to email me with guest suggestions or thoughts on this episode, you can reach us at info@robinhood.org. Crystal, I think when we talk about reducing child poverty, we're really talking about addressing a fundamental issue that underpins so many of the challenges we see across New York City and, frankly, across the entire state.
Absolutely, Kevin. And it's important to note that while the Child Poverty Reduction Advisory Council was established by the state, Robin Hood's involvement in this issue runs deep. Poverty, especially child poverty, has been at the heart of Robin Hood's mission since day one. And our policy and advocacy team has worked tirelessly to address the systemic roots of poverty in New York City. This collaboration with the council is a perfect example of how we're continuing that fight on a broader level.
That's right. Our senior policy advisor, Loris Toribio, has been closely involved in the council's work, advocating for the most effective, research-driven policy solutions to reduce child poverty. The council itself is made up of a broad coalition of experts and advocates, each with a different piece of the puzzle. But Loris's expertise and the work of our policy and advocacy team has ensured Robin Hood's voice is heard at the table.
And it's a table that really needed to be set. When you look at the numbers, it's clear that this is an emergency. 1 in 5 children in New York lives in poverty. That's about 800,000 kids. And when you think about the impact that poverty has on a child's education, their health, their overall development, it's devastating. Without the right policies in place, we're not just failing these children today, we're setting them up for even greater challenges in the future.
That's why the council's work is so critical, and why the upcoming vote on their recommendations is such a big deal. It's a critical moment, not just for New York, but for the entire country, really. If we get this right, if the council's recommendations are implemented and fully funded, we could be looking at a future where child poverty is cut in half by 2031. That's the goal, and that's what we're fighting for.
It's a fight we've been in for a long time, Kevin. Robin Hood has always been laser-focused on using data and research to guide our work. We know that when you tackle the root causes of poverty, you can change lives. And we're seeing that in our policy work, thanks to the leadership of advocates like Loris and the collaboration with state and local governments.
And we're thrilled to have someone with us today who's been central to all of this, Kate Breslin, President and CEO of the Schuyler Center for Analysis and Advocacy. She has led the charge for many of the child poverty reduction initiatives here in New York State. Under her leadership, the Child Poverty Reduction Act was signed into law, and she is a key figure on the advisory council. Kate, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to this Robin Hood moment.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
Let's start by talking about you and your work, Kate. You've been leading the Schuyler Center for years and have fought for policies that support families and children. Can you tell us a little about your journey? What motivated you to take up the cause of child poverty, and what drives you to keep pushing forward?
So the organization I lead, the Schuyler Center for Analysis and Advocacy, has for 150 years worked to improve state policies that affect people experiencing poverty and others who are otherwise disenfranchised. So I'm really both, I guess I would say, lucky and proud to lead an organization that's been doing this for so long. For me, it's always been really about fairness. And like Robin Hood, I believe that a person's zip code or where they're born shouldn't be determinative of the opportunities that they have to succeed. And experiencing as a child, experiencing poverty is one thing that severely limits opportunity. Poverty is a thief of opportunity. And so I've found that in the work that we do at Schuyler Center, poverty is one of the things that can drive good or bad outcomes in all of those. I've cared about this issue for a long time. I've approached it from the health perspective and from many other perspectives. And right now it's exciting to be thinking about it from the perspective of all of those.
Would you say that the whole perspective approach or multi-perspective approach informed Schuyler Center's work to pass the Child Poverty Reduction Act back in December 2021? Give us a little bit of insight for people who don't go to Albany, who don't sit in these rooms. What was that like? What did it require?
Oh, yeah, I think about it like this. We have state programs and we have philanthropy trying to mitigate so many of the challenges that families are facing. At the same time, we need to address sort of the structural things that are causing all of that to happen. And so we've been finding over the years that, let's take, for example, health. So there are many things that can drive poor health, and experiencing poverty in childhood and beyond is one of those things. And so we as an organization really said we need to be thinking about all of the ways we can mitigate the impacts of poverty, and we need to figure out the ways of changing the landscape. So we worked with other policymakers and came up with this idea of how do we craft some policy that commits the state to reducing child poverty. Now, let's just start by saying really what we wish we could have gotten is a commitment to end child poverty. That we'll get there. But we thought, let's start with something that we think people could get behind and feel like is doable. So what the legislation, the Child Poverty Reduction Act, does is it articulates that child poverty in New York is a problem. It's one of the areas where New York is not the leader. We are in we're 41st in the nation with regard to child poverty, so we're not doing well as a state. And so if we can cut child poverty in half, we'll be on our way. And what it will take to do that is many different policies. So we thought that this piece of legislation was a tool to articulate the problem and identify a goal that we can all work toward. So the goal is that New York State will cut child poverty in half over a decade with attention to racial equity. And that's really important. It's written into the law. Black children and Latino children experience poverty at twice the rates of their white peers. So then the law goes on to articulate some potential solutions like tax credits, housing, food benefits that should be explored. So right now, that's what we're in the process of. I want to call out that our legislature passed this bill with near unanimous and bipartisan support.
That's wonderful.
Nearly
That's great.
unanimous.
And
This
congratulations.
Governor Hochul, signed it.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this great momentum among our legislative leaders and our governor. And now is the time where we need to see the investment.
I imagine there's a lot of political and logistical work behind the scenes to get this off the ground. How are you all, sort of making that sausage and to kind of arrive at what you think the biggest impacts will produce?
So as policymakers, allowing children to experience poverty is a policy choice. So every day that we are continuing to allow our, 20% of our kids to experience poverty, our leaders are making a policy choice because we saw, as a great and recent example, at the federal level, we increased the child tax credit. We significantly increased it. We made it more available to lower income people. And we gave an extra bump for those who we know who are the poorest families, who are the ones with the very youngest children. And we saw child poverty reduced nationwide dramatically. So we have a very clear example of one thing that we know can work. So one of the things that we looked at and asked Urban Institute to model was some changes to New York State's child tax credit. So there's the federal one that changed during the pandemic for 1 year. Child poverty got reduced, then it went right back up when that went away. But New York also has its own child tax credit, as do many other states. So we asked the Urban Institute, for example, to model making the child tax credit available to the lowest income people and increasing the amount. And we gave them some different amounts. And certainly the changes to the child tax credit, according to the Urban Institute, could have a significant impact on child poverty. It's direct. In some ways, it's logical. Getting more money into people's pockets reduces the likelihood they'll be experiencing poverty. And so they modeled also some housing proposals to create a voucher program to help low-income families with housing. And they modeled creating a state-only food benefit for families who are ineligible to get the federal food benefit, SNAP. And then they took a look at sort of how those different policy proposals might interact with each other.
So we know what the data show, Kate. What are the families themselves saying? I'm sure that you and your staff, folks that you work with, have met some memorable and incredible New Yorkers along the way. Is there one family story that sticks with you, someone who really embodies why this work matters? And really the consequence of that choice, that policy choice to let poverty prevail?
I so appreciate you asking that. One of the things that we built into this piece of legislation was an expectation that the Child Poverty Reduction Advisory Council would include people who have lived experience. And one of the things we hear a lot is that when you're experiencing this level of financial deprivation, that one event can have a cascading impact. One of the people that we met with, she was working, she had 2 kids, she got a small increase in her wage, which put her just over the amount that allowed her to qualify for childcare assistance. So she had taken the salary increase, lost her childcare assistance, so was no longer able to bring her children to childcare because childcare is extremely expensive when you're, paying for it on your own. Then lost her job because she had lost her childcare assistance and couldn't leave her kids at home. And those are the kinds of things that we hear from people a lot. I have one person we talked to who said she really wishes that she could help her kid get a driver's license, but even that is sort of out of reach for them.
Financially out of reach.
Just So just the opportunities that our young people miss out on is something that we hear a lot about. There's both the sort of the hard concrete side of things and then that less tangible part.
What do you think are the most critical next steps to ensure that the council's recommendations not only get adopted, but that they're truly making a difference to reduce child poverty by 2031?
In the near term, what we are hopeful about is that the Child Poverty Reduction Advisory Council will be advancing recommendations to the governor by the end of this calendar year. The next thing that really is important that we need to see is we need to see the governor in the executive budget, which gets presented in January. And that's the governor's blueprint for the finances of the state for the coming year. We need to see an investment that is focused on child poverty. So I'm old enough to remember that in 2008, we experienced what we now call the Great Recession. We did see poverty go up. We saw, revenues at the public revenues go down. And when things started to come back, the economy did rebound and child poverty didn't. It stayed stuck. This is not a situation where it's going to trickle down. So a good economy doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to see fewer children experiencing hardship. So what we need to see some intentionality from our leaders around investing in the things that we know will have an impact on child poverty.
Kate, that is such a mic drop moment. We can almost end this conversation right there. How can organizations like Robin Hood and how can everyday New Yorkers support the work that you're doing and support the work of the Child Poverty Reduction Advisory Council so that we demonstrate that we have the will and that we're making it a mandate to pass these recommendations into law?
In some ways, I feel like my organization and some of the other advocates out there, we're the usual suspects. We've been at this for a while organizationally. What we really need is for our governor and our New York State senators and our New York State Assembly members to hear from regular people, certainly from our business leaders, from our civic leaders, whether that's city leaders or county leaders. We need them to be saying, this is why this matters to me. If you talk to mayors, they'll tell you that child poverty has an impact in their cities. We need them to be letting our state policymakers know. If you talk to business people, they likely understand that they have some staff who might be having challenges affording childcare. We need to have them let our policymakers know that this impacts us too, and here's how. Robin Hood has done such a fantastic job at really raising the economic impacts of child poverty. And I know that you've had colleagues do some analysis. We know that the state loses revenue because of child poverty. And whether that's because, we're paying more for increased health costs, poor educational outcomes, increased incarceration, there are so many reasons. So we need to hear from more people about why this matters and why it matters to them.
It almost sounds as if no matter your perch or your cause, there is a direct impact of child poverty on you and on the issues you care about.
Yes, and we have pediatricians telling us, I see this in my practice, here's how it shows up. And I think we all, as advocates and together with colleagues at Robin Hood, are trying to really do a better job at making sure that people do understand that even if they're not experiencing poverty, it impacts all of our communities.
Hey, thank you so much for being here today and for all the work you're doing.
It's great to be here. I so appreciate it. I hope to be able to come back and say we won.
We'll be checking in with you. I expect that people will heed your call and will want to know how it's going. Thank you again so much and good luck.
Thank you.
Before we wrap up today's conversation, we want to share another important perspective, one that adds a deeply personal dimension to the conversation.
That's right, Kevin. Earlier, I had the chance to sit down with Candace Cabral. Candace is a statutory member of CPRAC, but what makes her role so unique is that she's not a policymaker or a researcher. She's someone with lived experience of poverty, and she's been invited to the council to ensure that its recommendations are grounded in the realities that families face every day.
It's one thing to analyze data and trends, but it's another to hear how policies, or the lack of them, play out in someone's life. So, Crystal, what stood out to you most about your conversation with Candace?
Honestly, everything. Candace's story is so powerful because it shows both the challenges and the resilience of families navigating poverty in New York.
But I come from a Puerto Rican mother. My dad is Dominican, but he got deported when I was very young. So I never got to meet this person. I'm 40 years old now. Still don't know who my father is. My mom was she worked as a nurse. She literally was the prostitute, but also had a drug addiction of crack and coke at the same time when I was a kid. Dealing with that, I got abused when I was very young. My mom actually took me to the drug house, to actually purchase the drugs for her constantly. So if I didn't do that after school or before school, it was a problem. It became a problem. So when I went first to a group home when I was 16, that was the first time I kind of felt like love. You had a stability of eating, safety, you're in school, you have people looking after you. At the first time in my life, I felt like even education, I have led. So all my life I've been in special ed. So even in high school, but at that moment, it felt like I can make it. I was going to be a person that was going to be succeeding. When I turned 17, I got to come back home to my mom. Did amazing counseling, succeeded, but my mom did no counseling, no effort showing that she was willing to take me back home. But they gave me back to her. Even though if you see a court paper, I didn't want to go back. I was 17. I knew it was going to be more harder for me to go back in that living situation than what it was. So moral of the story, when I turned 17, I got out, told me, you're grown, you're 17. I can't do anything for you anymore. At this time, I'm actually homeless at 17. She's getting ready to move out. Her addiction is really bad. At this moment, I was scared. I didn't finish high school at 17. So I felt like I just stopped school. I stopped everything. I felt like I had to worry about where I was going to live. What was I going to eat? Who was going to protect me? What was I going to be doing? So for me, for a long time, I didn't have access for public assistance. So I had to literally learn to get all these things as a 17-year-old. Didn't know these departments, didn't know how to navigate, didn't know how to read. So when I went to welfare, public assistance, when they were asking me these questions, birth certificate, Social Security, where do you live? I didn't have any of these things. So it took like 90 days or 60 days to honestly get on a case, to be getting any food stamps, to get any assistance or any support.
What I found so striking about Candace's story is how those experiences shaped her desire to advocate for others. Now she's using her voice on CPRAC to push for solutions that reflect the needs of real families. Here's what she had to say about how she came to join the council and why this work matters so much to her.
My son is 19 now. It was totally different. He was growing up with me, guys. He was going through all these parenting classes with me. He just told me that at 19, he was like, Mom, we started going to board of education because the school, the environment that I was in, just everything. And I looked at him and I was proud of that. My kids are advocating now. Honestly, I look at my kids and I tell them that you were put here for a reason. Like this is big for me. Like being on this council means everything. This is legacy for me. This is something that I can show my kids that your mom wasn't just talking about it. She was honestly being about it. You can't take my story and give it to someone else. You have to live by it. You have to understand these organizations and be a part of them, guys. You can't just say, you write up this documentation and think is that. I've been to a lot of organizations that they feel that parents shouldn't be the voice, guys. We shouldn't be on that documentation. We shouldn't be on that paperwork. But you're taking our ideas. What we're saying to our community, what we're saying to these councils is coming up to say, this is what our community is saying. So why not uplift what we're saying? You don't have to live through this, but you at least want you to be compassionate, understand why it needs to be changed. We need to be at the table. We need to be getting paid for these things so our children can see that we're just not being a part of these tables. We're actually making change.
It's incredible to hear someone like Candace bringing so much insight and passion to this effort. It's a reminder that solving poverty isn't just about programs and policies. It's really about people. And people like Candace are key to making sure those solutions are truly effective.
Absolutely. Candace's voice on CPRAC is a vital reminder of what's at stake. I think her contributions will resonate with so many families across New York, and I'm so glad we could include her perspective in today's episode.
Yeah, thanks for bringing us that conversation, Crystal. And thank you, Candace, for sharing your story and the work you're doing to fight poverty. As we close, let's keep her words and her experiences at the forefront of how we think about these challenges moving forward.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us today. If you want to learn more about the work of the Child Poverty Reduction Advisory Council and how you can get involved, check out the links in our show notes or at our website at robinhood.org/podcasts.
And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode, where we will continue exploring the most pressing issues impacting families in New York City. This episode of This Robin Hood Moment was produced and edited by Corey Winter. Graphics by Mary Power. Our theme music is from Epidemic Sound. I'm Kevin Thompson, joined by the ever-insightful Crystal Cooper for Robin Hood, New York City's largest local poverty-fighting philanthropy. Thanks for listening.